Rex Crane, his father, was one of the middle children of William E. and Jemima Crane that lived here. Bishop Crane was our bishop for
24.
Thank you. I was going to lie and say 28, but all right. Bruce bonded very nicely with his grandparents and spent a lot of time and learned a lot of Mink Creek stories. And for the rest of it, or for his life, for what he did for growing his family, was he taught history in the Logan school district for 31, now it's working, 31 years he was in the school district down there. He is now retired, but that doesn't change how much he loves history. He lives history. It's part of him and part of his life. We'd like to welcome you, Bruce. Thank you for coming.
So, I'm an old school teacher. If I talk this loud, can you hear me?
Yes.
There's always that student. What? Huh? Can you hear me if I use it without a mic?
Yes.
Are we good? Really?
Just hold it down slow.
I was. There are... Really? Okay. There are few places that I would rather be than Mink Creek. And I always come back here to recenter myself, and I have all of my life. Being from Mink Creek is a source of great, great pride for me. So, when I was asked to present on the history of Mink Creek, whenever you teach a survey of some history of a place or even an event, you have to decide what you're going to speak on. And so I have whittled it down to a few things that I hope will be interesting and new to you. But before we can talk about the history of the establishment of Mink Creek, I need to introduce you to these people. This is James Morgan Keller and Karen Valentine. Welcome to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. She was the first wife. And they met and married on Bornholm, which is an island in the middle of the Baltic Sea, part of Denmark. They were farmers by profession. This is the round church at Newker, Bornholm, where Karen Valentine was raised. On Bornholm, the churches are round. And the legend is that's so that the devil can't catch you. Can't worry. But this is the church that Karen attended, was christened in, and knew. This is the church in Clemenster, just down the road, where James Morgan Keller lived and was raised. This is not the church that he attended, because the church that he attended burned down, and this is the rebuilt church in Clemenster. After they were married, they were tenant farmers on Bornholm, and this is one of the homes that they lived in. This portion is the outbuilding and like a barn, and it goes into an L, and they lived in this L-shaped part of the house. All of the farms on Bornholm are named, and out by the lane is a rock with the name of the farm on it. And the farm's names have not changed for 200 years. So if you know the farm name and you know a general location, you can find the farms. So when my Uncle Keith went on his mission, grandmother told him what farm they lived on, and he went and found it. And I saw a photo of it as a young kid, and when we were out traveling around and we saw it from the road, I knew it from the photo. So this is the home, one of the homes that they lived in. As young marrieds, there were some missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that came to Bornholm and taught them. They, along with a handful of other families, converted to the church. And as soon as that happened, they started to receive a great deal of persecution. And so they decided to immigrate. And they headed for Salt Lake.
Bruce, ask you a question.
Yes.
How did they get to Bornholm? The Keller family. How did they get to Bornholm?
Okay, the history in the library in Runa states that in the 1500s, early 1600s, a Keller from a northern region of what eventually becomes northern Germany, Prussia, Poland, was so disgusted over the Protestant Reformation and what was going on, he got his family, some livestock and some seed, got in a boat and set sail for wherever they ended up, and they ran into Bornholm, and they went into the island, found fresh water, they found what they needed, and they built a farm.
So he was kind of like Noah.
Noah Keller was his name. And then he went back and told other families, because he knew the other families that were discontented, and they came over and they started, that's what started the population on Bornholm. And in the middle of the island is a large farm, which is where they settled and cleared and started, and it is still called Kellersgard, which guard is farm. It's still called that. There's not a Keller to be found, but it's still Kellersgard. And most of the land is still intact as a farm. So when we were there, we went to church in the little branch. As the meeting started, a red-headed woman with a little passel of kids, I shouldn't say that, given my mother had 7, a passel of kids, we had 2, this is a passel, came in a little late, walked through the chapel, sat down, and we had our meeting. After the meeting, the branch president came down and said, "What brings you to Bornholm?" And I said, "Well, my ancestors were from here, Jens Mogensen Keller and Karen Valentine." And he goes, "What?" So our friend said it in actual Danish, it's accurate, and he goes, "Oh." And then he disappears and goes to the branch office, president's office, and brings out a book that's a handwritten copy of the original book that has the first members, clear through anyone who converted to the church, and James Morgan and Karen are in the book. Gives who baptized them, the date, when they left for America, there they are. This red-headed girl comes up, she says, "Did I hear you say James Morgan Keller?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "I married James Morgan Keller's sister's great-great-grandson." And I said, "I thought I recognized you." I said, "That's amazing." And she says, "We have moved here to help take care of her in her old age." I said, "Where are you from?" Because she didn't have any accent at all. She said, "I'm from Rexburg, Idaho." Suddenly feeling at home. She served a mission in Denmark, served on Bornholm. Her husband saw her, followed her back to Rexburg, courted her, and got her back to Bornholm. So there's our cuz on Bornholm. So they immigrate, and they will come to Perry, or 3 Mile Creek as it's called then, and they live in a dugout up on the hillside. It's a dugout with just a little bit of shelter out over the top of it, and they run a blanket down the middle, and they live on one half of the hole, and another family lives on the other half. That's their start here. Then they move to Brigham City, and they get quite a bit of land, and they build a log house, and they kind of settle in, and Lorenzo Snow calls James Morgan to practice plural marriage. Between the time they're in the dugout with a blanket between it and practice plural marriage, he also got called to go back to Bornholm as a missionary. You know, the people that were just beating him up, so he left. So he goes back, serves a mission, comes back, plural marriage, they're in Brigham City. He eventually has 5 wives total, 4 at any one time. That sounds bad. 1 passed away early. So then from Brigham City, Lorenzo Snow gets this idea that they need to start developing more for the Brigham City Co-op, and they want to see if they could make linen. Well, James, Morgan, and Karen, when they were tenant farmers on Bornholm, raised flax to make linen. So several of them went up. They lived in Fort Mantua, and then eventually they build homes. Family grows. The flax is a bust. It doesn't work. He starts a store, but he's starting to have a lot of kids. I'm no mathematician, but I can even figure that out. Starts to have a bunch of kids, and they have to get more land. So they decide to go looking for areas that they can just move to and settle. So he, with his son-in-law John Olson, married to his daughter Lena, their oldest child, and some of the other sons, come traveling up through this area, and they come through along Strawberry, and they really think this will work. And so they decide that they're going to make a go of it here, and they build a cabin. It sat right across the highway west of LaRon Baird's house, down in that flat by Strawberry Creek. That's where it was. And it was 16 feet by 16 feet. And they put up a bunch of the natural grass, and they put it up. They went to Mantua, got some cattle, brought them up, brought some supplies, and brought 2 of the boys to winter in that 16 by 16 cabin for the winter, to see if they could make a go of it. The one son is William. He's 14 years old. The other son is Janice. He's 12. They bring the cattle up, they leave the supplies, kiss him on the cheek, and leave. For the winter, to take care of the cattle and to make a go of it. 2 months into it, Janice, the 12-year-old, is so homesick he can hardly stand it, and he waits until it thaws and freezes and gets a crust on the snow. He puts snowshoes on, and he walks to Franklin. Feet are frozen. Some people, they take him in, they warm him up. Once he's warmed up and healed and fed, he makes his way back to Mantua to his mother, and Will stays in the cabin, the 14-year-old, for the rest of the winter. The report is that it's a success, and James, Morgan, and Karen, and Anna Christina, another wife, come to Mink Creek with other families from Mantua who are in the same position. They're looking for more land for their families, and they start to settle. So they end up here in Mink Creek. Once they get here, this is in 1871. Some of the things that they have to do fairly immediately when you're going to settle is they start to have to produce ditches. And they all come with a unique set of skills. And so we're going to do ditches. Can you see it? Hanging on that barn is a board. Shauna, if you'll go to the next one. Scott very kindly let me take it down off the barn. Thank you for that. This is the apparatus that they use to dig the ditches in Mink Creek to get water to the fields and to start to irrigate. That board is 12 feet long. The long end is 18 inches high. The short end is 7 inches. So they would put the short end in and start digging until the tall end was level. They'd put a level on it, and that meant it had the exact fall that they wanted for the ditch. And then they'd move it to the next length. And that's how they knew to keep a grade on the ditches, was that board. And that's the board. Now to me that is remarkable. Because, can you go back? Just a second. Because if you're looking for it, it's hard to find. You got to know somebody that knows it's there. Yes?
That is what they measure right there. The one leg is 2 inches longer.
Well, no.
It's got to be, and that makes the fall. You level it.
It's 11 inches.
11,
When I measured it. Dorland, I'm not making this up. Bruce, would you present on the history of Mink Creek? Let me make something up.
You wanted to run faster, that's why it's longer.
Yes. Okay, next. As they build homes, with the log cabin, as they got a little, so they could do it a little fancier, or when they started to build frame homes, the process that they needed to do was to plaster the inside of the walls so that they're smooth, right? James Morgan Keller was a trained plasterer from Bornholm. This is a lime kiln, the one that was along the highway just as you went out of Mantua toward Logan along the old highway. Do you remember it being there? Then when they widened it, they took it out.
I thought one of them was still there.
No, nary a trace. What they would do is they would take limestone and they would stack it in the kiln. And they would build a fire under it. And they would keep the fire really hot. And it would literally burn the limestone down to a fine white powder that still had oxides in it from the limestone. After it was burned down to nothing but pulverized dust, they would put it in a container, whatever they had, and they would mix it with water. And the water would take the oxides out of the lime. And the pressure from the water would compact it just enough. And once the process was finished, they would drain the water off and you'd have the most beautiful, just like pudding, plaster for the inside of the walls. And then they would take that and plaster the insides of the walls. The closest lime kiln to where we are sitting right now is up the road to the cemetery. When you get to the cattle yard to go into the cemetery, to the right is the ditch. Just above the ditch, you see a depression in the ground. That was the lime kiln to do all of the finish work for Birch Creek area and around here. And then there are a few remnants that I believe I've been shown up Mink Creek of kilns that are still there of stacked rock. So that skill was something that was employed very quickly, and James Morgan Keller came with a great deal of skill to do that. So another thing they have to do is fencing. This is not news to anyone in here, I know that. This is a cedar post. This is a cedar post that was found on my granddad Crane's farm by my Uncle Basil when he was here. Uncle Basil found it, knew exactly what it was, held it over and said, "Bruce, I have something I think you'll want." He was right. I went to load it in the truck and he's helping me with it, and I said, "Be careful, don't scratch it." And he just rolled his eyes. When the first settlers got here, they had to contain the animals. They didn't have wire, they didn't have barbed wire certainly yet. And they would make these fence posts and they would drill holes in them and then put them close enough together to put willow branches, stout willow branches between the posts, and that's what held their livestock in. And this is one of the original posts from my great-grandfather's farm. I like. Now you might ask, so Bruce, Do you happen to have the auger that your great-grandfather used to make the fence posts? Yes, I do. So this is Janice's auger to make the fence posts and to corral the animals. I find that remarkable, to have that connection with that. My brother actually found the auger under the granary at Granddad's place, and I was so jealous, and he wouldn't give it to me because I was jealous, until he needed some of his school work done. I made a deal. One of the skills also that came, which, thanks to Debbie, I know this now, is Peter Egley. Thank you. Peter Egley, one of the first settlers here, after everybody starts to come, brings with him the skill of
Baskets.
making baskets. He was a basket maker. And during that period of time, did that pressure you up?
No, I knew you were going to.
Okay. During that period of time, baskets, along with crocks, become part of the essentials of what they did, and they used them for a lot of different things. I've researched, welcome to my world, 19th century Danish basket making. And there's a certain style and way that they do it. Well, this is a basket that was found in an old home here, all handmade in the exact style of 19th century Danish baskets. I knew that. And then when I was talking with Debbie, she has one identical to this. And I said, "You have an immigrant basket." She goes, "No, I have a Peter Egley basket." And I said, "How do you know that?" And she said, "Because my mother's grandfather was Peter Egley, and he gave it to her." And I said, "That's good enough for me." So now we have two Peter Egley baskets, made in the 19th century style, and the stays that hold up the weaving apparatus are actually punched through in the bottom, and they're oak. A great skill that was employed and blessed the lives of a lot of the settlers, and you can imagine how useful that would be. Okay, so they're here, they're trying to survive, it's not easy, and in the spring, well, by the time spring comes, they have survived the winter on dried meat, put up whatever they could of fruits and, right, the foodstuffs, pretty limiting. And what they had to store them in were crops. And that's very limiting. So here in Mink Creek, there's a plant that starts to green up very early. My great-grandmother, being from Denmark, called it Gronkaal. Now, I want you to understand that's not what they call it, that's what I'm pronouncing it as. Gronkaal. It's pretty close. So, I hear this story that of my grandmother's gathering Gronkaal in Mink Creek. And I thought, well, they brought the seed with them from Denmark. I'm going to track down the Gronkaal, because that's what I do. We travel and we're sitting in Copenhagen, sitting down for dinner, and our hostess had heard that I was looking for Gronkaal. And she fixed us creamed Gronkaal. How cool is that? In Denmark. I'm looking at it, tasty, lovely. I come back to Mink Creek, I can't find anything that looks remotely like Gronkaal. She sends me a package of seeds to encourage me from Denmark of Gronkaal. Years I've been trying to track down and find that last plant of Gronkaal that's left in Mink Creek that the immigrants lovingly brought. Welcome to my world. And so my cousin, who's quite a bit older than I am, she's not here, I'll say she's older than I am, she used to gather Gronkaal with my Aunt Golda. I said, "You've got the corporate memory. tell me about Gronkaal. She said, it grows on the hillside up by the cemetery. And I said, really? So every 3 days I was up here, you were building the house. I was walking the hillside like this, trying to find something that looked like Gronkaal. Finally, I saw something become green. So I take a picture of it and I send it to her and I say, is this Gronkaal? She goes, I don't know. Send me some. So I get some, put in an envelope, send it to St. George. She gets it. She goes, that's it. I said, cool. So I go up, well, it's everywhere. It's in every pasture. It's so rare. I found the last stand and it's in the western United States. So it's not Gronkaal at all. It's wild carrot. And then when it goes into blossom, it's Queen Anne's lace. But don't mix it up with, there was something else that'll kill you. I was so relieved she lived through our experiment. That's it. It's hemlock. They look very similar, and there's a bunch growing by Norm Larson's chicken coop. So this is Mink Creek Gronkaal. I dried her a whole container of it. And this is real Gronkaal from Denmark. Well, a friend of mine who speaks Danish looked at me and said, well, you know what Gronkaal means, don't you? And I said, no. And he said, green kale. Really? It's kale? And he goes, yeah, you buy it frozen in packets. And anyway. So my Aunt Golda would come harvest it and put it in a bean soup with a ham hock and put a little in it. And my cousin used to like to pick it out and eat it. She liked the flavor of it so much. Aunt Golda would slap her hand and tell her, wait for the soup. So Shauna, in her support of my passions, makes a bean soup with ham hock, and we put some Gronkaal. All I can tell you is a little goes a long way. My cousin wrote to me and said, be careful, don't put too much in or your soup tastes like pasture. And I said, that's a coincidence, because that's where, okay. So, the early settlers here were so in need of something green for some vitamins that the first thing that came up that they knew was edible, they ate. And they didn't know what it was. And what it looked the most like was Gronkaal. So for generations, it's been Gronkaal. And that was their food source early in the spring for the early settlers to get some vitamins. They came as a body of saints. They came as devout members of a church with testimonies. And they wanted to meet together, and they wanted to share what they had. And when they met, it was in Danish. Most of them didn't speak any English. The very first place that they gathered, when they first got here, was under a willow bowery up in the field between Croslands and Craig Larson's. When the old barn was there, just uphill and over from it was the old willow bowery. And that's where they first met. And they decided they needed a better place to meet, and they started to create the old rock church. And it was right here to the side of this one. Just right there is where it was. I've got to make sure I've got Carl Peterson. Carl Peterson was the rock mason from Denmark who did all of the masonry work for the rock church. He was also known as well digger because he'd dig the wells and then line them with the stone. He was, by all report, very good at what he did. The old rock church stood into the 1900s, And then they decided that they needed a different building, and this one was started to be constructed. And once this was done, that one was torn down. So, we have the benefits of a beautiful church house. This is one of 3 photographs that I know of the old rock church. I've been hunting old photographs for Mink Creek history since I was 6 years old. And this is one of 3 that I know of that church. Now, if any of you have a large one on your wall at home that's an original, please do tell me. I'd like to see it. But this will give you an idea of the masonry. Carl Peterson died living here, and he's buried in the cemetery. His wife moved with her children down to Richmond, and she's buried in Richmond. He homesteaded the farm at the mouth of Birch Creek. And he built a stone home there, and then eventually a frame home, where C.G. Christensen. So there was great devotion, and this is a photograph, I don't know if you'll recognize it. This is my grandfather, having just been put in as bishop. He had not been bishop very long, and Norman Larson. And the rest are all identified. They came here with that great devotion. Now, for this church house, as they were building it, these old high priests were they have evidently, the description I give is they go real Old Testament on you. When they built this church, when you come in between the 2 arms of it and up the stairs, there's that triangular pediment in the face of the church. When they did the addition and the remodel of this church house, the workmen found up in the attic, inside that pediment, 2 stones. And those 2 stones were from the old rock church. And the workmen were like, rocks? So they tossed them out the window, rolled them down the hill into the gutter, into the borrow pit down here. My mother and I were up here, and somebody had mentioned to Mother that they had found 2 rocks in the attic of the church. She came down to me, and by this time I was pretty steeped in all this. I said, do you know where they're at? She said, yes, and we got in the car and came up, and I retrieved the 2 stones. These are the 2 stones that were found in the attic of the church. When I gave a presentation on the history of Mink Creek a while ago, I mentioned them. I didn't bring them, and when Lana heard that I was coming this time, she said, please bring the rocks. I think she was thinking rocks. But for Lana, I would do anything, so here they are. So I thought it was very interesting that there would be 2 rocks in the attic of the church. I was visiting with a cousin who's a church historian in Salt Lake, has done a lifetime of work on church history, sites, and the church history. And I told him about the 2 rocks. Without a hesitation, without a hitch, he said, well, Bruce, those are witness stones. I said, witness stones? And he said, oh, that's an old tradition. That dates back to the Old Testament, that they would designate stones to stand as witnesses of what would happen and transpire at sacred places. There's a scripture in the Old Testament. Shauna, will you read it?
Yes. It's Joshua chapter 24, verse 27. And Joshua said unto all the people, behold, this stone shall be a witness unto us, for it hath heard all the words of the Lord which he spake unto us. It shall be therefore a witness unto you, lest ye deny your God.
These are Mink Creek's witness stones. The people who came here, the early settlers, were devout. They were interesting, they were wonderful people. They had their foibles, they had their flaws. but they were devout people, and they understood their devotion to their Heavenly Father. And I'm very grateful for that, because what they did puts me in the position I'm in now and can enjoy the benefits both of their hard work, but also their testimonies and their devotion to a God that they worshiped and they understood and had a relationship with. Someone asked me, so Bruce, are you going to put them back? The last person who asked me that asked it very kindly, and I appreciated the tone. The first person who asked me was a little while ago, and they were quite accusatory, like I'd gotten up in the rafters and stolen them. And I said, I'd be happy to. I think they need to be back in the church. But you've got to guarantee me that you yahoos won't roll them down the hill again. To which that person went, oh yeah, good point. So I'll visit more with Bishop McKay, and we'll see about the stones. They need to be in a wooden case, crate, with a plaque that says what they are.
And another one says, don't touch.
And another one that says, don't discard. Don't DI. I'm very grateful to those ancestors, to the point that I don't know if you have seen the project in the cemetery of the photos. Have you seen them? It started out a lot of years ago now, when I would notice grandmothers or great-grandmothers with great-grandchildren in the cemetery standing by a headstone trying to explain to the kids who it was. And I thought, you know, there's a better way to do that. We could at least have a face with a name. It certainly makes them more personal. So I did some signs for my immediate family. And then after I did that, well, there's Carl and Christine and Caroline Hausner, who have no descendants. Nobody's going to do it for them. I love them, so I did it for them. And like I said, I've been gathering photos all my life. I have photos of all these people at home in a file. And so I have the signs made. So we now have added however many, and this year, the Jensen family, I worked with them, and they're going to add about 13 more signs of their family. They were so pleased. But I would like to tell you about this man, Niels Rasmussen. He lived right below the schoolhouse in that building block, the flat. I was visiting with his great-great-great-granddaughter in Brigham City, and she said, we just can't find him. We don't know where he's at. And I thought, well, I know most everybody in there. I'll go look. And then just as an aside, she said, as we were talking about him, he was blind. So I go up to the cemetery and I walk it. And there's one headstone that the mark on it of who's there has fallen off. It's metal, it had fallen off and was nowhere to be found. So I go back and can't find him. So I go to the list that very kindly is provided. And I'm standing there, and no name that I know to call him can I find. And I said to myself, Bruce, just stand here. Just look. Just look. So I stood in front of the list, and I was looking. And there's listed blind man. And I said, really? Well, hello. So I find where he's buried, and it's the marker without the name on it. Well, I have his death date. And so I walk around the cemetery and find out what years were they using those metal markers. And it's within a 12-year period of when he died. So we knew it was him. So the family had a small stone marker added behind the one without the name so that he's now identified, and we now know where he's at. Now, the question is, Bruce, does that really matter?
Yeah.
Does that really make any difference? I think it does. I think it does. There's 2 little boys buried up there that drowned in the Mink Creek. Sister Gleason, that's what I always knew her as. My dad was mispronouncing it. It's what? Blessing. Dad always said Sister Gleason. She lived in a house on the brow of the hill just down from yours. There was a house there, and you can see some of the stones from the foundation. She was there as a single mom with 6 children. Immigrated from Denmark. Had an operatically trained voice and sang in church often. To great reviews. Her 2 little boys were down on the Mink Creek in the spring runoff had eroded the bank. They were standing on it, it gave way, and they both drowned. And they're buried up here. Their classmates pooled their money at school to buy the headstones for that mom. Their primary class? It would have been school too. Primary class bought the headstone. And then she moved away. Well, no one knows those little boys. I had pictures of them. I had their photos. So we put their photos on their graves so that they can be remembered. And the first year we did it, we were putting up signs, and some grandkids came up. And they went up on the hills. They went and looked at the pictures of those boys. And they went up on the hillside and picked some dogs and went down and put on their graves. I was teary. I said to Shauna, there it is. The hearts of the children are turning to the fathers in the most literal of senses. There it is. Brothers and sisters, all of you, I would invite you to find your family in the cemetery. And for Memorial Day or whenever you want, but especially Memorial Day, put their picture on their graves. I would invite you to participate in this so that when everyone goes into the cemetery, we can meet together and know each other. Because one of the greatest events of my life is going to be when I rise up. Now I'm counting on that's going to happen. On resurrection, I hope the place isn't empty by then, because I'll rise up and see everybody that I have loved, that I have known, that have lived here for over 100 years. I will know them. I'll be able to greet them. And you know, I don't know what it is about me, but I believe they will know me. I'm pretty confident. So I would invite you, if you have family here, get pictures, have signs made, put them out so that Memorial Day we can go and meet as a community family. And that spirit of Elijah can distill upon us as a community in a great, great thickness. There's another project that I would like to invite you to consider. I had the occasion to visit with Scott Siemens. He very kindly said, come in and visit. So I went in to visit. I'm trying to overcome my shyness. And as we visited about the house, that's the house my folks lived in when I was born. So I have a personal interest in it. And as we visited, it became very obvious that as Scott and Kathy have lived there and raised their family there, people would stop and say, oh, we used to live, or we used to, I know, right? You hear those stories. Scott, bless his heart, paid attention and remembered all of them. And as he starts to talk to me, I'm going, oh. So I asked Kathy for a pencil and paper. She got me. I'm just writing as fast as I can. And I go home after we visit, and I start mowing, and it dawns on me that I have photographs of everybody that lived and owned that house. And I just went, well, that's unusual. I should put something together. So I started to think about it, and then I went back, and Kathy let me walk through and see the configurations of the rooms. Scott knew exactly who built what out. It was amazing. So I put together a history on that house. And I'm going to invite everybody here to write a history on their house or an old house on the property. Get a photo, do it however you would like. But what I would like to think we could do is everybody do the houses And let's put them all together and put them together in a book of the history of the homes here. I'm working on the one that we have now, the home we have at the base of Capitol Hill. Just trying to figure out who owned it. Because like Scott said, you never know. Sometimes it's done with a handshake. I found 2 handshakes, and they're really hard to document. So this is, we're just going to go through this quickly as a proposal to you to consider doing for your home. By the way, Eric says, I have a great picture of the old house that lived. If you need a copy, do you have it? Okay, good. Okay.
Oh, hang on.
So I write an introduction, thanking people, and I'm very excited about it. This is the cover of it. That's the house as it appeared when we lived in it. Okay, we'll just keep going. My introduction, and then my vision has expanded recently to the Native Americans that lived here long before the Danes hit, for centuries. And Scott mentioned artifacts that he's found in the garden, and he was kind enough to let me photograph them. So Mink Creek was settled 8 years, consider that, 8 years after the Bear River Massacre, the largest massacre of Native Americans in U.S. history, just down the river. Only 8 years after that, Mink Creek was settled. So there's that whole another layer of history. Okay. These are the owners and the years when they owned the home. Scott gave me those years, and I went into the courthouse to verify them. He was either dead on or off by maybe 2 years. 2 years was the most he was off. It was remarkable what he had. So here are the owners. Here are the owners, and then this is my mom and dad, and that's me. I'm the only person that got to be in this that didn't own the house. And I figured, I'm writing it. That's the benefit of being the historian. My life will read much better than it was lived. Okay. In 1880, when Amos and Hannah Keller showed up, they built one room and it was log. Next. In the walls, when my parents were doing some work on it, they found stuffed in between the logs in the chimney a check. Zion's Cooperative Mercantile for some eggs and stuff in kind in Logan, Utah, made out to my great-grandfather. Now you might say, Bruce, do you happen to know where that's at? I have. Okay. So then they lived in it for a little while, just a few years, and they built another room. Okay. Then the next owners built 2 rooms, and this is Chris Eskelson. Well, he lived here, and they've moved away, and nobody really is that familiar with them, but they lived there for a number of years, and his wife's sister died, and they lived on the west side. And he and his wife took the 2 kids in. The older boy kept his original name, which was Loftus. And the little girl, who had some special needs, they adopted. The boy, with the last name of Loftus, died when he was 20, while they were living in this home of scarlet fever. Chris Eskelson buried his wife while they lived in this home. He remarried while they lived in this home, and then as a family, they moved away. The son, the adopted son, Mr. Loftus, is buried in the cemetery here, as are the Eskelsons. And I thought, well, for heaven's sakes, I've got pictures of them, so there will be pictures on them. I don't have one of the Loftus sons, but I have one of the parents. So they add the rooms, okay? Then Duke and Marjorie Keller widened the front door because they couldn't get furniture through it. That was their contribution. Okay. Bill and Burr add a porch. Go ahead. Elizabeth Manrinus Hansen, Elizabeth loved to do rock and masonry, and she did the wall out front. Then she went up to Viola's and did that one. Then she did a bird bath in the yard. Scott very kindly gave me the bird bath. It's in the process of being restored. Okay? And then my father built a room on, so kind of him to make it 3 small bedroom homes for 7 children. Okay? And then there were additions. Go ahead. Then all of the outbuildings, just go ahead and go through them. He had the history on where they came from, if they'd been moved there, who built it, what the original purpose was, when it was modified. Just keep going. Now, then my dad in the poultry business, a lot of you remember that perhaps. The old coops that are now like this, but that's what they were originally, and that's my dad in the field, headed down to do the chickens. More. The old root cellar and the orchard. He even knew who planted the trees. Go ahead. So that incredible history on the house of who did what and what they looked like. I would propose to us as a community, put together some sort of history on the homes so that we can gather and have that history. I think it would be very valuable to us as a community. And I know that there are a lot of photos of homes that no longer stand. Photos of homes that no longer stand that need to be recorded and written. Does anyone have any questions at this point before I end? Please.
Is that one stone a keystone?
I do not believe so, but I know what you speak and why. I don't think so, but it might be.
It looks the same.
It looks like it could be. Anyone else? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they just needed a stone. I don't know how to do it. Brothers and sisters, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for letting me speak of things that are very dear to my heart. Like the early settlers, I come here with a great devotion in my heart to my Savior and to my Heavenly Father. I too am trying to live the very, very best I can. And it is my goal, and I use them as a real meter rod, that I might be able to be reunited with them and with all of you. There's no one else I'd rather be numbered among than you. I bear you my testimony of the spirit of Elijah and the power of that of binding our hearts and turning our hearts to our fathers. I'm grateful for the gospel, and I'm so grateful for you. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.